Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. It's the summer of 2006. We've got two brothers down in Texas sitting in a garage, and they're about to make a business decision that, quite frankly, sounded completely insane. They decided they were going to build a cooler that cost 10 times more than literally every single other cooler on the market. And it's not because they had millions in venture capital to just burn through. In fact, they had just cashed out their small business, and this new idea, it was everything they had. But they had this wild theory that absolutely nobody else was willing to test.
Okay, let's dive right into the fundamental contradiction that built an absolute empire. On one side, you have the market average at the time, a $30 cooler you could just grab at any big box store. And on the other side, the Yeti cooler, boldly and completely unapologetically priced at $300. Now, looking at that massive gap, the obvious question is, why on earth would anyone pay 10 times more for a cooler? It's a fair question, right? Remember, founders Roy and Ryan Siders weren't wealthy guys. They had pooled their entire life savings on this single, completely contrarian idea. They believed deep down that price could actually be a signal of quality, rather than just this constant race to the bottom. Well, spoiler alert, their crazy theory worked. By 2025, 19 years after they dumped their savings into a hunch about coolers, Yeti's annual revenue stood at a staggering $1.87 billion. The journey of how they got from a $300 garage idea to nearly $2 billion holds some absolutely incredible lessons about business, quality, and just completely ignoring the status quo. So let's jump into Section 1, the world before and the $30 week link. To really understand the billion-dollar cooler, we have to understand the world Roy Siders was living in. Before Yeti, Roy built things for a living. Specifically, he built high-end $50,000 custom fishing boats. These things were handcrafted to take an absolute beating in the Gulf of Mexico for serious outdoorsmen who never ever cut corners. But on every single one of those expensive boats, the exact same frustrating thing kept happening. The standard, quote-unquote, good enough coolers were failing miserably. The ice would melt in just 24 hours. The cheap plastic latches would just snap under pressure. And the lids? They would physically warp in the brutal Texas summer heat. For clients who invested top dollar in the best rods, reels, and boats, the standard $30 cooler was the weakest link in their entire setup. So between 2003 and 2006, Roy and his younger brother Ryan tried to find a fix. They actually became distributors for Engel, which is an Australian company making really solid, well-engineered coolers. They spent 3 full years learning the outdoor market from the inside. But as they talked to the guides, the hunters, the serious fishermen, they realized something absolutely crucial. These coolers were better, for sure, but they still weren't good enough. The market gap was sitting there wide open. Which brings us to Section 2, refusing the easy path and engineering the vault. Right, so they reached this major turning point. In 2006, Roy and Ryan made a really decisive choice to just close up their distribution business so they could build the ultimate product themselves. And they put their money where their mouth was. They bootstrapped the whole shebang entirely. $500,000 pooled from the sale of their prior ventures. There were no outside investors dictating terms here, just $500,000 and a total commitment to build a product with zero compromises. Now, the technical breakthrough that made this possible was wild. To get that vault-like performance, they actually flew all the way to Taiwan to find a manufacturer who could execute a process called rotomolding. Usually, this is a heavy-duty manufacturing technique used to make things like kayaks and massive industrial containers. It involves spinning really thick polyethylene into a completely seamless one-piece shell. The kicker? It had never been applied to a consumer cooler before. No way. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why it was such a game changer. Rotomolding completely flipped the script. Instead of thin plastic walls with weak little seams, the Yeti featured a totally seamless shell packed with 2 solid inches of dense polyurethane foam. While standard coolers were prone to cracking and warping, the Yeti was literally crush-proof. And the most important metric for any outdoorsman, ice retention jumped from a measly 24 hours to an incredible 5 to 7 days. I absolutely love this quote from Roy Siders. Just listen to the resolve here. We were going to make the best cooler ever made, and we were going to charge a hell of a lot for it. I mean, wow. This wasn't about mass appeal at all. It was a purely contrarian commitment to quality. They built the product as if price were no object and then unapologetically charged exactly what it cost to build it right. But, building it was only half the battle. They still needed to sell the thing, and their strategy was totally unconventional. They completely walked away from the massive big box retailers, so no Walmart, no Costco. Instead, they went straight for the niche experts, hunting guides, boat dealers, fishing captains, basically the specialists whose reputations were on the line every single time they took a paying client out on the water. Actually, they didn't just sell to them. A lot of the time, they just gave the coolers away to these guides to prove their worth in the harshest conditions, which, when you think about it, is a breathtakingly bold risk for a fully bootstrapped company, just handing out $300 inventory for free.
All right, moving on to section 3, from niche to billions and scaling the tribe.
So that seeding strategy, it was an absolute masterstroke. Think about it. A fishing guide reaches into a Yeti after 3 sweltering days on open water and pulls out an ice-cold beer for a high-paying client. Boom. That guide instantly becomes a highly credible, completely unpaid salesperson that Yeti never even had to formally hire. But to be clear, growth didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding process. From their founding in 2006, they relied almost entirely on word of mouth. But by 2011, they hit a tipping point. The Outdoor Tribe didn't just use Yetis, they fiercely defended the price to skeptical friends and slapped Yeti stickers all over their trucks. The brand basically became shorthand for someone who doesn't apologize for quality. Then came 2014, and they brilliantly leveraged all of that hardcore outdoor credibility. They launched the $35 Rambler tumbler. Suddenly, they took the vault-like reputation of a $300 cooler and transferred it to an everyday item, like a stainless steel coffee cup. This single move massively expanded their market to college campuses, corporate offices, and morning runs. It introduced the brand to tens of millions of people who had literally never even stepped foot on a fishing boat. And the financial results? Just staggering. From zero in 2006 to $469 million by 2016. By 2018, they IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. And by 2025, $1.87 billion. The $300 cooler that nobody asked for had somehow become the gold standard that every other cooler in the world was measured against.
So, what can we take away from all this? Let's look at section 4, 3 lessons from Yeti and building the gap.
Because, frankly, the real lesson here isn't actually about coolers at all. It's about having the courage to ignore a good enough market, ignore the race to the bottom, and purposefully choose to close the gap between mediocrity and excellence. Let's break these takeaways down. Lesson 1. Premium pricing is a promise, not arrogance. Yeti didn't charge 10 times more because they just wanted some fat extra profit margin. They charged it because they built something 10 times better. And here's why this matters to you. When you charge a premium, you're making a commitment. It forces you to genuinely deliver a superior product every single day. Honest pricing is quite literally a part of the product. Lesson 2. Your first customers are your most powerful marketing. Rory and Ryan completely bypassed the easy retail route and deliberately chose the hardest users, the professional guides. Why? Well, because proving your product to the most demanding, credible experts out there is worth way more than any traditional advertising budget. Who you let in first absolutely determines who follows. And finally, lesson 3. Build the gap your market is too afraid to fill. Listen, the bad cooler exists in absolutely every industry. It's that product or service everyone just kind of tolerates because the better version seems too risky, too expensive, or just too hard to build. The gap is always there. And the person willing to pay the price to close that gap, they're going to end up owning the entire category. Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought. What good enough product or process are you simply accepting today? Where is the $30 cooler in your industry, your work, or even just your daily life? I really hope this explainer inspires you to look at those accepted frustrations, not just as annoyances, but as billion-dollar opportunities. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Now go out there and challenge the status quo.